I'm Dr. Eric Wesselmann, psychologist, professor, horror fan. If you're like me, you enjoy a good scare, a tale that freezes your blood and chills you to the bones, something that sticks with you in the dark, dreadfully quiet moments of the night. Perhaps you ask yourself why. What draws you and countless other like-minded fans across the world to tales of the macabre? On this show, I probe deep into these questions with creators, fans, and scholars of horror entertainment. This is HorrorCraft.
Today, my guest is independent film director Paul A. Brooks. Paul has recently completed his first feature-length film, Hunting For the Hag, which is, of course, a horror film. So, Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Eric, for having me, and thank you for walking me through how to change my background. I appreciate it.
I do what I can. So I've got a few general questions, and then we'll sort of see where things go, and then eventually move into more specific questions about what you've done so far and where you're going. So let's just start with what draws you to horror entertainment?
It's easy to do. I think a lot of filmmakers gravitate towards horror because you can do it for not a lot of money. You can do a lot of weird things with it. You know, there aren't a lot of boundaries. There aren't a lot of rules like there are with other genres, and it's a lot of fun. You know, I was a musician in about 150 years ago, and we started making music videos, and I said, you know, this is a lot of fun. And we would do some short films. We did a zombie movie in 1998, me and some of my friends. And the more I got into it, the more I said, gosh, you know, like every time we do this, it's a lot of fun. Maybe we should get a little bit more into it. And so we made a zombie horror feature in 2004. We shot it, and that's what really kind of got the ball rolling for me, was doing that feature film with some of our friends. We shot most of it in Decatur, some of it here in Bloomington Normal, and pretty much since then it's been horror.
Gotcha. So you say it's easy, right? And I assume that you're referring to easy in the case of budget type things, right? But there are, of course, folks who, like, I feel like there's a fine line to walk, right? If it's not effective as horror, right, you can very easily move into what we might call camp, right, or more humor rather than horror. And the two, of course, are related. But talk a little bit more about what you think where you see that tightrope.
Yeah, that's interesting, because at the premiere that we just did for Hunting for the Hag at the Normal Theater, there was a lot more laughter than I was expecting. Mm-hmm. So the interesting thing about that is you just don't know how an audience is going to react to something until you put the movie out there and people start watching it. And to me, that's fun, because I love getting different people's reactions, and people coming up to you after the show and saying, I really liked, this particular aspect of it, and maybe it's something that even you as a filmmaker hadn't considered before. So I don't worry too much about whether or not something veers into camp if it's not supposed to. I'm more concerned about whether or not somebody's having a good time watching the film. Mm-hmm. And yeah, like my whole sort of mission on set when we're shooting a movie is to have fun with it. I think that comes through. I think everybody on this film had fun with it. It was difficult, but at the same time, everybody had a good attitude about it. And I said easy. I probably shouldn't have said that, because yeah, it was really hard, but it's like the least hard of the genres. You're going to have a much more difficult time making a $20 million sci-fi movie, than you are a little found footage movie like this.
Mm-hmm. All right, so you mentioned laughter, right? And things happening when you didn't expect it. I was sort of at the premiere. I kind of felt like a little bit of a fly on the wall, right? Because some of the laughter very much seemed to be, I feel like, folks that knew you, right? I mean, that was a premiere that was a lot of family and friends, right? And so there are some honestly funny things. There are some things that perhaps they laughed because they saw this as, well, these are people that I know,
Right.
and kind of moving, I guess, in that direction. I also wonder how much of some of that might be a cognitive distancing mechanism, right? The humor
Yeah.
making, because there are, without spoiling too much, there are some parts in there, as we've described, off camera, that I found very, very difficult to watch, which is good. I mean, from a horror perspective, I mean, it's the genre is sort of hinging upon making you uncomfortable, but uncomfortable in a way that's tolerable, that's still somewhat safe for fun, right? I mean, there are lines that you can cross and it no longer becomes entertainment, right? And that differs for everybody. So
Right.
how much do you think some of the humor might help take the edge off?
I think you're 100% right. In fact, when we were at the screening, and thank you, by the way, for doing the Q&A and doing my introduction. The premiere night that we had at the Normal couldn't have gone any better, I don't think. So obviously, as a filmmaker, I was really about as happy as I could be that night. So thank you for that.
Pleasure.
But yeah, it was strange for me because we were, I think, in the fourth row. I was sitting next to my co-writer and co-star, Sierra Renfro. And then to her right were the other co-stars, Alexa Maris and Jasmine Williams. And Jasmine was laughing her ass off the whole time. And I'm like, what is she doing over here? Because I just didn't expect it. Like, react how you want to react. I thought it was hilarious, but there was a lot of that, and I haven't had a chance to ask her in particular whether or not any of that was nerves, of just being there and seeing the movie for the first time, or a genuine reaction to whether or not any of that was funny. But I think you're right. I think there was a lot of that in the theater where there's some funny moments, but then as things start to get more serious, I was surprised that people were still laughing. And then there came a point, it was very odd to me and very surprising. There came a point where everybody just shut up and it got deadly serious. And I was nervous because, it's the first time that we screened the movie. There is some stuff in the movie. I tried to warn people in my introduction beforehand, hey, if you're not feeling this, it's okay. Feel free to go get some popcorn or whatever. Because it's a horror movie, and yeah, the vibe, there was like this light switch vibe, where it was just completely different all of a sudden. And I thought that was interesting. And in terms of the stuff that's in the movie and in terms of, sort of, I guess you'd say, pushing the envelope to the proper point, or what you feel is the appropriate point. I was really nervous about that as I was finishing up the movie and I was watching different cuts of the movie and saying, gosh, we're some of this is kind of gnarly. And I talked with Sierra about it. I talked with our executive producer, Seth Cromick, about it, and just sort of expressed my concerns of like, are we good? Are people going to be mad about this? Are people going to be horrified by this? I mean, it's very difficult to figure out exactly where that line is. And I think the reality of the situation is that it's going to just be different for different people, right? I mean, some people came up to me after the show and were just like, dude, that was so awesome. Like, congratulations. But I think that there's some people out there who might not know us, who might watch this streaming somewhere at some point and maybe not be into it. So I don't know, you just kind of got to roll with it and hope that you're not pissing anybody off too much.
Right. I mean, when you're dealing with different horror theorists, particularly creators, have talked about to what degree are horror films as narratives safe versus a little dangerous, right? A little transgressive, and then they vary. So, some horror creators have often considered horror films to be conservative, not necessarily politically, but just the idea of you upset the apple cart, right? You have to have a threat, and then you reestablish at the end. And those are the ones that are, if we think about it like a roller coaster, you get off and you have fun, and it's safe at the end, right? Maybe the ending isn't completely hokey and tied up. Maybe there's just a little bit left over for a potential sequel, but generally there's a survivor. They're relatively safe physically. Psychologically is another story. But then there's others like George Romero, for example, who argued that some of the best horror films, the ones that really stick with you, are the ones that really just jab on those cultural pressure points and psychological pressure points, and are really transgressive, right? And don't give you that sense of closure at the end. And like anything, there's probably some push and pull, because if you want your film to play to the widest possible audience, you want to strike that balance between shaking people up just enough, but not so badly that people leave and are just like, I can't do it.
Right. Yeah.
Which is going to be more of a niche audience who's going to want that super transgressive, nihilistic, and there's a place for that in horror.
Yeah, I mean, let me be clear about this. Hunting for the Hag is not a Serbian film, or Human Centipede, or Hostel. I am really not a fan at all of what some people describe as like torture porn, and some of the more modern stuff that's out there. It's really not my cup of tea, and I don't think that anyone who went looking for that sort of thing would be super into Hunting for the Hag. I mean, we tried to have as much fun with this movie as we could. So I think that the majority of horror fans would enjoy, and especially if you're a found footage fan and you're a fan of that subgenre, I think that people would be into what we have to offer with this movie. As a big George Romero fan myself, I certainly am someone who appreciates the social commentary aspect of things with virtually all of his films throughout his career. But there's also, I mean, he's been pretty clear about saying some of the stuff that was in Night of the Living Dead, from his perspective, was a little bit of an accident in terms of the social commentary. So again, it kind of comes back to what people are going to take away from it individually, and how much control you as a filmmaker have over your own film's narrative, in a way.
Right. There's the intentions of the creators. There are the experiences of the audience, and these are different truths, right? There's, as one of my colleagues and co-hosts on other podcasts will often say, there is my truth, there's your truth, and then there's the truth, which is somewhere in the middle and includes stuff that neither of us are even aware of.
Right. Yeah, and like that, and I embrace that. I want people to come in, with, or come out of the movie with an opinion that maybe surprises me, or noticing something about the film or one of the characters that surprises me. To me, that's a lot of fun.
So I want to put a pin in some of that. We'll come back to the sort of give and take between creator and audience and time. But jumping back just slightly, you've used the term a lot, found footage, right, to describe this film. Talk a little bit about what that category means to you, and why you chose to center your narrative in that.
Again, it came down to trying to do something easy. And also, again, I realized that it was not going to be quite so easy. We were planning to shoot a movie in early 2020. We started, Seth and I started talking about doing a movie in Central Illinois, and it was going to be this zombie movie. And I was writing a script with a friend of mine, and we had the script pretty much ready to go by, like February, March, and then obviously everything got derailed because of COVID. We lost a whole summer, whole year, and 2021 rolled around, and I said, I do not want to let a whole summer go by without making something. I was feeling very sort of creatively, as a lot of other people were at that time, feeling kind of closed in and unable to do some of the things that they wanted to do. Everybody was getting vaccinated, and I said, can we just please go out there and shoot something quick and cheap and dirty? And I don't care if it's not, the greatest thing in the history of the world. Let's just do something, please. That was kind of the mentality going into it. Because the zombie movie that we had planned kind of turned into this much bigger thing. And so I talked to Seth about it. I talked to Sierra about it. I said, would you want to write something with me? We had collaborated on some stuff previously, and she said, yeah, let's do it. So I think everybody was kind of feeling that, nobody was really able to go out for a while and like be on set and act and direct and do their thing, So the idea to do a found footage movie kind of came out of that. Let's do something quick and dirty, so that if we make some mistakes, it's okay, because it's a found footage movie. You can get away with it a lot more. And that was the mentality. The problem with that I found out when we started shooting the film is that in a lot of ways it's more difficult. If you're shooting a more traditional narrative, okay, here's shot A, here's shot B, here's shot C, boom, 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 boom. You're more used to the process, you know how to shoot it. For found footage, you have to plan everything out a little bit more, because the takes are going longer. You have to figure out how you're going to seamlessly transition from one thing to another while maintaining the illusion of this is somebody actually shooting this. So there was actually a lot more thought going into it. And if I had to do it over again, I would add at least, 3 or 4 extra shooting days, because we were just, there were some nights where we were shooting until the sun came up, and we were like, oh, okay, well, guess we're done for the night because there's the sun. So it ended up being a lot more complicated in some respects because of the planning that needs to go into some of that.
In addition to the term found footage, you've also described this as having folk horror elements as well. Can you talk a little bit about what that means to you?
Yeah, we've kind of been going back and forth when talking about the movie in terms of the subgenres that we associate with it. And I've mentioned this in a couple interviews before, that it's technically not found footage. Technically, it would be a faux documentary, but that kind of came about because we shot everything here in Central Illinois, and then we added, the following year we shot more and added to the story, and that kind of changed the dynamic of what you're watching a little bit. But the folk horror element of it is something that I've been getting into recently. I think there's kind of been a resurgence with some of the boutique companies putting out like some really cool packages of like folk horror movies lately. And, with the idea of the Hag, this sort of legend or this myth of this creature who supposedly lives out in the woods. And to me, it was just an interesting way to sort of blend a couple things together. Obviously, when you're talking about found footage, the Blair Witch Project is the first thing that comes to mind. And like I said, we wanted to shoot something quick and dirty. And so I started thinking about what could we do something like that to where fans of this particular subgenre would maybe be intrigued by the title or intrigued by some of the elements of the movie because they're fans of the Blair Witch Project and the different sequels and stuff like that. I'm not someone who shies away from saying, hey, this was an influence on the film, because clearly that film was a big influence on a lot of different found footage projects. Mm-hmm. For me personally, the 2016 film, which is the direct sequel to the original Blair Witch, was more of an influence in terms of the look of the film and sort of the feel, because I feel like as technology has progressed, found footage movies look a lot better, and there's not as much shaky cam stuff in it, which I'm sure you appreciate. And yeah, it was just a fun way to do something kind of like that. And then our composer, Ryan Aldrich, did a great job, I thought, of putting the score together. We've gotten so many compliments so far on the sound of the movie. He did a really amazing job. And initially we said, for the music in the film, let's try to do something kind of John Carpenter-esque, which obviously a lot of independent horror films do. As we started working on the score and he got deeper and deeper into it, he wanted to add a lot more sort of like ritualistic sounds to it to sort of go along with the folk horror element as well, which I thought worked out really well. And I was grateful that he brought up that recommendation, because I really love he did all the music mixing, the audio mixing and everything, but he did the entire score as well. And I thought that it came together really nicely.
Well, we're talking about music. So you mentioned you're a musician as well. At least in another life you were. To what degree do you sort of feel that the structure of music, like where is it similar and where does it diverge from film storytelling?
I think for this film, I had a very clear idea of where I wanted music and where I wanted absolutely no music. So I think that it's definitely something that you need to take into consideration as you're writing, as you're going through make sure that it's not an afterthought, because there are some of my favorite stuff out there. I'll just give you an example. The reimagined Battlestar Galactica, which ran from like 2003 to 2009 on Sci-Fi Channel, huge influence on me. And part of the reason that it was such a big influence on me is how it used music as a storytelling device and actually incorporated the music into the plot of the series. I won't get into any spoilers or anything for anyone who hasn't seen it, but I thought it was just a brilliant choice. And there's some of my favorite movies. A large part of why I love them so much is because of the music. Bubba Hotep has a fantastic soundtrack, and it sticks with you. It gets in your ear, and you might be thinking about the score and the soundtrack more after you watch the movie than you're thinking about the actual movie. So I do think it's important. And like I said, Ryan, our composer, did a fantastic job sort of weaving some different elements into this film that I think really helped tie everything together.
So there have been a lot of folks who have, on both the filmmaking end and as well as the music end of things, have speculated and theorized about how sound design, both music and sound effects, can enhance horror, right? But you said you were very intentional about places where you didn't want music. So where are some spots where you think that silence, or at least non-diegetic score, could be a hindrance? And where could silence actually drive the horror forward?
Yeah, I was pretty specific about, saying, hey, I really don't want a whole lot of music or even sound effects for the majority of the film. And the reason that there's music in the movie is because it takes a hard twist at some point and kind of becomes this whole other thing. But for the majority of the movie, there isn't any music, because if it's, in my mind, if it's a found footage feeling movie, I don't want to take you out of that element by putting in something that seems overproduced, or putting in sound effects that that you can tell probably weren't in there. And I've definitely seen some found footage movies that do that, and it just pulls me straight out of it. Again, with our film, we're kind of toying with a couple different subgenres, so we had a little more wiggle room, I felt. But I've seen some movies that did that. I'm like, just not feeling it, and so I wanted to make sure that we didn't do that on ours as well.
I like that you used the term sort of pulled you out of it. So from what I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a few weeks since I've seen it, most of that music then comes in during that middle section where things get a little bit more real, if we will.
Right.
That is actually, for me as a viewer, that's a nice distancing cue, right? So pulling out of it, of the narrative, was helpful for me, because of that. It reminded me that this is not a real film, whereas the horror is a little bit more real. I could still tell myself, I know this is a film, right? That these folks are okay in real life, right? This isn't like the original Blair Witch, where they, sort of like had the cast hide for a little bit to sort of keep up the illusion that it could be real. It was still a little interesting to actually meet your cast later, when, I was like, last time I saw you was on film and bad things were happening to you.
Right.
Good to see that you're okay. But circling back a little bit, it's funny because if you get, for example, Psycho, the original, right? The Blu-ray, for example, has one of its special features. You can watch the famous shower sequence without music. And I've had conversations with film nerds who are like, well, what's the point then? Because so much of it is the stinging violins, etc., the tension, etc., the release. So many people talk about the importance of the music to that, the fear in that scene. But for me, when I watched it, with just this the diegetic sound effects, it scared me more. But I suppose maybe we could argue that it's maybe just scaring in a different way, right?
Right.
It's not that, sort of suspense and shock. It's a little bit more dread, especially if you're watching that special feature. You know what's going to happen, right? So it is a little bit more like someone just set up a camera in this shower and you're going to watch someone get murdered. And there's no other sorts of cues to remind you that this is a construction.
Yeah. And I think that different people, just going back to different people, are going to have different reactions to it. I can totally understand how you would find that scene to be more scary without the music than having it in there. And I think that's one of the great things about making movies, is that you get all these different reactions, and different people are going to approach a scene differently. And you get people on set who might have a different idea about something, and I always welcome that. I believe very much in being a collaborative filmmaker. I think especially if you're a director, if you're the type of person who has kind of a my way or the highway approach to something, I don't think that you should be directing movies. Because actors and cinematographers, anybody who's on set is going to bring their perspective to a project and their expertise. And to me, I always want to get input from different people, because usually in my experience, it just ends up making a project stronger. So I always want to hear, different perspectives and different ideas on how we can do something different, including something like that, whether or not to include music in this particular scene, or, whether or not to even do what we did in this movie, where we went in a totally different direction. At one point, there was a lot of discussion about, hey, do we really want to do this? Should we really do this? Is it going to be weird? And I asked a lot of people about that because I wanted opinions and I wanted some different perspectives on it.
Yeah, this idea of a collaboration, it makes the end product a gestalt, if you will, right? Everybody brings something together, there's synergy, and hopefully what you get out is even better than what you envisioned. I think of papers that I write in academia in the same way. Some people prefer to have fewer collaborators or write more solo papers. I actually have very few solo papers, and I have lots of projects where I have many co-authors, and I view that just personally as, for me, it's a strength, because I like working with cool people, right? A lot of smart people are only going to make the project better from my perspective.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's exactly why I asked Sierra if she wanted to write it with me, because we've been friends for a long time, and writing 90 pages is a lot. And I don't want to do this by myself, So I will take all the help I can get with writing, with coming up with, shots for a movie. Love talking with cinematographers about ideas for getting different shots and stuff like that. Just getting, everybody's opinion on that and getting a big stew going, that's what's fun to me.
So I put a pin in this earlier. Let's come back to it, since you're talking about how a project, certainly from the creative side, takes on a life of its own, right? A movie, a work of art, a story comes out in a particular time and place, right? And audiences then come to it and they experience it based upon the time and place that they're in, right? And so when you were creating this project, it was early on in the pandemic, right? To what degree do you feel like all of the stuff that's been going on these last couple years influence, sort of situate audiences' experiences, and how might that look different in the future?
Yeah, I think that's definitely there's an element of that in this film for sure. And I think that there's been a lot of that lately because of the pandemic and because of just some of the stuff that's been going on in America the last handful of years, all over the world, really. There's a lot of tough stuff going on. And I sort of felt when we were writing this film that I wanted to sprinkle in a little piece of social commentary somewhere. Again, I'm a big George Romero fan, so I wanted to get a little something in there. And I think if you watch the film, you will notice it. There's a little bit of a statement about what it might be like for three young women to travel ever so slightly out of their comfort zone in America in 2023, and how scary that might actually be. And that's something that, as I have traveled to different places around the country, even as just a white guy, sometimes I feel uncomfortable. So I just can't even imagine how some other people who are not white guys from normal Illinois must feel. And so we put a little sprinkling of that in. And I think that Sierra, really wrote some great stuff. Some of the more the stuff that we're talking about where people might squirm in their seat a little bit and have some trouble with it, she wrote a lot of that. And I think that was, from a woman's perspective, great to have her on board to get that really sort of authentic feel for it. Unfortunately, we had a little bit of a miscommunication, not a miscommunication, but just everything was happening so quickly with this movie as we were writing it and as we were in pre-production, that she was writing some scenes for a character named Danny, not realizing that I was going to be playing the character. And when she had that realization, she went, "Oh no," because it's uncomfortable for me and for her. And I don't know, I hope that uncomfortableness comes through in a way that is at least has some entertainment value for the audience, as well as the social commentary aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Did I answer your question at all? I have no idea.
Yeah. Got a couple of questions here that are a little bit more detailed into the weeds, but things that I was just curious about when I was watching it. Why set it in Central Illinois?
Again, just easiness.
Mm-hmm.
I was in LA for 6 years, and it's a completely different process out there of trying to make a movie, because you don't have the freedom out there to just say, hey, we're going to go out to this little piece of property, or we're going to go to this gas station, or whatever the case may be, and shoot. You just can't do that out there. You have to have permits. It's just a lot more complicated, because it's the hub, and that's the business out there. And so you have to abide by the rules if you want to be a part of it. You can try to skate around it a little bit, and you can try to, Ed Wood it and roll the dice and see what happens. But I don't know. We started talking about doing a movie in Central Illinois while I was still living in Los Angeles, because of that factor of, we know more people out here who are going to let us, shoot on their property, or we can go here and do this, and we can call this person to, shoot it or whatever. And just the connections and the easiness of filming were going to be the deciding factors there.
Okay. So I appreciate the candor, and as you're talking, I'm like, this is going to disappoint horror scholars in the future who are going to write about Hunting for the Hag and talk about the meaning of putting it in Central Illinois, and particularly from the folk horror perspective, and the American Gothic. And
well, I will say this. I mean, that I did take into consideration the fact that a lot of horror, for whatever reason, is based in Illinois. Obviously Halloween is one of the things that comes most to mind. And I don't even know if I saw this before we shot Hag, or it may have been after, but somebody said that Haddonfield, if you sort of like pay attention to where they're saying Haddonfield is on the map, it's basically around Pontiac, which is where we shot Hag. And instead of saying Pontiac, we call our fictional town Hawthorne. So there's a little bit of a connection there with some of the horror movies of the past, and sort of like, for whatever reason, a lot of Friday the 13th and everything sort of converging on Illinois. So I'm like, hey, why not? We'll do it too.
So I'll put this link both in the video as well as on the YouTube page. But one of our reporters here for our NPR affiliate WGLT, Ryan Denham, he did a story where he interviewed John Carpenter, and part of that larger story that he made talks about some research he did trying to position where Haddonfield actually would have been. So I appreciate you bringing that in, and I'll throw that as some supplementary material for our audience.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Nightmare on Elm Street, for example, Springwood. I don't know where it was originally set, but as the mythos continued, it was put in Ohio. You've got Children of the Corn is more or less set. I was certainly shot in Iowa. I'm not sure if that's where they write it in the narrative, but we could argue there's the small town aspect, right? If we think about horror as, or a lot of horror for much of, at least in American writing, was all about external forces coming in, to previously safe areas. In the case of folk horror, you deal a lot more with the horror coming from the past, but being very much embedded in the community, directed against outsiders who stumble into it, right? There's this give and take of, is your area really that safe?
Right.
What does that mean? Where do we center the horror? So I think that's all of that could be adding to this ambiance, right? I mean, in your film, there's lots of shots of corn,
Right.
There's, people who talk about folk horror, for example, will talk about one or two of the key pillars of folk horror are making the environment, the landscape, almost a character in and of itself. And then adding to that is using that landscape to create a sense of isolation for the characters that you're empathizing with.
Yeah. And the one thing I'll say about that really quickly is that I also think I'm the type of filmmaker that uses what some people call the Roger Corman approach, which is, if you have a cool location at your disposal, go ahead and use it. Like I kind of can't help myself sometimes if I see a piece of property or whatever, which is how this sort of started. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I wonder if I could do something with this. And the gears start turning because of that, as opposed to, I have this idea and now I have to find a location that fits the idea. To me, that's a lot more difficult than saying, here's this cool place. I know that I have access to it and I can use it whenever I want to. Let's do something with that. I don't know. I have the Ed Wood streak in me, the Roger Corman streak in me, where I just want to keep it easy. Let's get the movie done. And then people can talk about it afterwards, whether or not there's any significance to the setting or not.
Excellent. DIY all the way.
Yep.
So you mentioned this, you have a fictional town that you called Hawthorne Woods. Where'd you come up with that name?
I think I was doing some research on the hag, because the hag is something that is really out there in folklore and lots of different stories about different witches and stuff like that. And I'm pretty sure that I came across something about an actual Hawthorne hag, and decided to call the small town where the part of the movie is set Hawthorne, to sort of tie that in. And that way we could call it the Hawthorne hag.
Nice. So you get the nice alliteration there.
Right.
Did you know there actually is a Hawthorne Woods, Illinois?
No.
Yes, it's from what I can tell, it is a Chicago suburb. I think it's northeastern, maybe. So because I originally looked when I heard reference to that in the film, and I'm because you were talking about it being in central Illinois, so I'm like, I wonder if they were. So yeah, it actually is a real place.
we definitely had to look around and do some scouting in terms of when the girls are out in the woods for a decent portion of the movie. Trying to figure out where we were going to shoot that was a little bit difficult on the short pre-production schedule that we had, and we ended up shooting that in an area called Humiston Woods, which is not too far away from Pontiac. So it was nice that we were able to keep everything fairly contained, so that we didn't have to, travel up to the suburbs or anything like that to shoot, because we were on such a tight, timetable.
So what was something that you learned from working on this film about your craft that you will take with you forever?
The number one thing that we learned, I don't know if it's necessarily about craft, I guess you could say it is to just give yourself more time. I think that I had a little bit of maybe hubris in saying, oh, you know what, it's a found footage movie. This shot right here is going to take 10 minutes, no problem. We can pack this day right here. We just didn't have enough time. And so you really have to be careful with making your schedule, making sure that you have enough time to shoot your movie, because quite frankly, we didn't. There were a couple scenes that were on the schedule that didn't get shot, to where I had to come back with kind of a skeleton crew and shoot some of it myself. And I won't say which scenes they are so that nobody knows. But every time I see those scenes, I cringe, because I'm like, wish I had my crew here for this, and pickup shots and stuff like that, where if you, and again, when you're trying to do this on such a short schedule, sometimes that's necessary because everybody else's schedule, everybody else has lives to live. This is not a lot of people's full-time job, making movies. People have to go to work and stuff like that. So it's tough. But we did have the option to schedule another day or two before people had to go, and we didn't do it, and we should have done it. So that's my number one thing. If you're planning on making a movie and you think something, you think a shot is going to take 10 minutes, schedule that shot for 30 minutes, because it's probably going to take 30 minutes.
At least, right?
Yeah.
Well, for what it's worth, there weren't any, whatever you were cringing at, me in the audience, I was not picking up on that. So obviously you know the film inside and out, you've seen it a million times. Most folks, unless they're rewatching it that many times as well, probably aren't noticing it. So
thank you. I appreciate that. We had to work really hard to get some stuff to match. A lot of it is color correction. A lot of it is the music sort of bringing everything together, and the sound design and everything. But I appreciate you saying that.
what is a favorite behind the scenes moment that you'd like to share?
Let me think about that one for a quick second. I already told you about Sierra not realizing that I was playing Danny. That was fun. And I've been putting all of the behind the scenes stuff together recently. And that's been a lot of fun. So I'm trying to mentally flip through everything. Okay. I think one of the more difficult aspects of this shoot was the weather was brutal and the bugs were brutal. And you heard Alexa and our actors talk about it a little bit at the premiere, how difficult it was for these California girls to come out into the middle of the woods in central Illinois and just be not surrounded by spiders, basically covered in spiders. And you see some of it in the movie where they're screaming and they're freaking out. That's all real. There's a lot of real reactions to insects and creepy crawly things in the woods because they were just everywhere. I had scouted, I mentioned Humiston Woods. I went out to Humiston and I scouted it, and it was very nice. I'm like, this is great because we have these big paths and nobody's going to have to worry about getting stuff all over them, And then when we went back out there to shoot it, we had these big thunderstorms and everything was just a mess. And I mean, there were spider webs all over the place. You couldn't walk anywhere without getting daddy long legs all over you. And at some point you just get used to it and you just start flicking them off, and you kind of get Stockholm syndrome somehow because of they're just on you constantly. So I don't know if that's necessarily fun behind the scenes, but it was definitely a big part of an unexpected part of making the movie.
As someone who absolutely hates spiders, I'm right there. I completely understand what your actors were experiencing.
It was tough. Fortunately, we had a couple wranglers. We had a couple guys who didn't care. And so like Seth and one of our DPs, Ian, would just kind of lead the charge, swat them out of the way, with a broom or whatever, and take care of 80% of it. But every now and then you'd still get one on you.
I suppose that gives not being an actor myself, but I feel like that definitely gives some fodder to draw on, right? Especially when one has to respond to something that's potentially out there but you don't see, right? So, you as a director goes, be scared, right?
Yeah,
That's something hypothetical.
Yeah, I really didn't have to do that because, it pretty much took care of itself. A lot of times we would send them out, and because we couldn't be in the shot because they would be doing they'd be walking around 360 and showing everything, we would really have to stay back and just kind of let them go do their thing. So we would go out there and I would just say, go get 10 minutes of stuff and come back. And really didn't know what happened until, we looked at the dailies later on.
That's awesome. It's a surprise, right?
Yeah.
So let's broaden out here with sort of a question to kind of go out on. What other types of horror topics would you like to tackle in your future work?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot lately because we're trying to find a home for this movie right now and trying to figure out how we're going to sell it and everything. But at the same time, I'm trying to think ahead, and I want to get into some more. I want to make something that is actually next time a little bit more overt with the social commentary, and something that has more of a message. I felt maybe a little bit skittish with this one because it's like such a small movie. I don't want to beat people over the head with any topic or anything like that. So I guess I can't say exactly what it's going to be next, but I would like to do something that has a little bit more of a message. And Seth has a list of movie ideas on his fridge, about 9 or 10 different movie ideas of things that we want to do. And it really just comes down to us picking what we want to do next and, starting to tackle that. So him and I were just talking about that last night, figuring out at some point what we want to do next. So hopefully people will stay tuned. Hopefully if people like Hunting for the Hag, they'll want to see more. And, they'll come back and see what we do next. And I know that we've already had some questions about whether or not we're going to do a sequel. It's like you go through this, you put so much work into this, you kind of want to do something different right away. But we'll just have to see how this movie does and kind of cross that bridge when we get to it.
I just very much at the end of the film. Well, okay, I won't say that because maybe that'll be a
Gotta be careful.
I'll be careful. Never mind. So obviously you can't necessarily talk about the execution of the ideas, maybe because you don't know what they are going to be yet. But what are the what would be some social commentary messages that you'd like to deal with?
I think a big one for me right now is social media and people's addiction to social media. I'm 44 years old, so I'm old enough to where we didn't grow up with it.
Right.
When I was a teenager, it was just about making your own fun, talking to people, hanging out. And I don't want to, sound like I'm 85 years old or anything, but I think that young people have definitely lost some of that. I'll talk to young people sometimes, and it's hard for them to engage you in a particular way. And I feel bad about that. Like they're not doing anything wrong, obviously. They just grew up in a different time. And so there's some aspects of that I would kind of like to address. And I do have some ideas for it, but it's all kind of percolating up here right now, and I need to write some of it down first.
There you go with the so I'm similar to in age with you, and I got my first email address as a freshman in college, and I remember the horrors of dial-up modems, AOL, and right.
They don't know how bad we had it. They don't know.
Well, there you go. There is the horror, right, of having to have a dial-up modem where no one else in the house can use the communication, and you are, you're downloading that song that you've been looking for, and it's taken 5 hours and it crashes 2 minutes before it's done.
Yeah, it was
That's
tough. It was
horrible.
tough back in the day. And I'm certainly not anti-technology or anything like that. I'm on my phone all the time. But there's got to be a balance, and there's got to be a time and place for it. So a lot of times if I'm out with friends, I'll try to put myself back in the 90s and what that was like, or 2000s or whatever, when you're just hanging out, trying to have a good time, trying to do your thing. Forget that the phone is there, because it's so easy to start picking it up and tuning out of whatever is going on right in front of you, that I just feel like if people could figure out that balance a little bit more, one, I think that they would be happier. Two, I think that they would be able to, kind of communicate in a different way with people. Maybe, I don't know.
I think that the data, without going too far off onto this tangent, the data certainly support your argument. There's a lot of folks in different disciplines who study what goes by different names, but some people will talk about this as what they call technoference. So to what degree does the presence, not even just the usage, but sometimes just the presence of that technology can hamstring social interactions, right? Just
Right.
having that phone in front of you is a distraction.
Right.
Every time, every time you hear a noise, does it draw your attention away? And what does that then do to the person that you're interacting with? Do they feel phubbed, for example? And short answer is yes.
Yeah, I mean, it short circuits your brain in a way, right? Where your attention is suddenly diverted somewhere else,
Mhm.
and you're not focused. And to bring it back to movies, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a social situation. You can be by yourself watching a movie. If you have your phone sitting right next to you, all of a sudden you've lost 20 minutes of that movie because somebody sent you one text, and now you've been on your phone for 20 minutes. So I try to put my phone away while I'm watching movies. I try to limit myself, when I'm using my phone, and in what sort of situations.
Mhm. Excellent. Be a whole other conversation in of itself.
Yeah, sorry.
No. I mean, it's I could do this all day, like Captain America.
Yeah.
Anywho, we will now bring this conversation to a close. Paul, it was wonderful chatting with you. Please tell our audience where they can find you on social media.
Sure. So our little production company that we have to make our fun little projects, is called Into the Night Motion Pictures. And we have all the usual social media stuff, most of it anyway. Mostly what we're doing right now is on Instagram. So if you want to follow us over there, just search for Into the Night Motion Pictures and we should come up. Our handle is ITN Motion Pictures. You can search for Into the Night Motion Pictures on Facebook as well. We have a YouTube channel that we started that we haven't really put too much on there yet. So I would mostly stick to the Instagram. And then we have a link in our bio on Instagram where you can go to the YouTube channel. You can go to our merch store. We have fun t-shirts for sale and stuff like that. Pretty much everything that you need is going to be on our Instagram. So that's what I would recommend.
Excellent. Alrighty. Well, Paul, always wonderful chatting with you. I hope we can do it again sometime. And I look forward to seeing Hunting for the Hag in physical media and also learning more about your future projects when those happen.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We're really hoping for a Blu-ray release or something like that a little bit down the line. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, Eric, thank you so much for having me.